Hey everyone, so I'm going to start a short series of videos on different Christians I think I want to always commend to you all to learn, to get to know. So I'm calling it the Getting to Know series. And I'm going to start with really the foundation of what Christian faith and religion really comes from. Of course, the cornerstone is Jesus Christ himself, but the apostle that really spread Christianity, made Christianity famous throughout the whole world, and the one who did more work than probably any other person in the sense of Christianity and championing it is the apostle St. Paul. And Apostle Paul is someone that students you need to get to know. You need to get to know who this person is. Christianity is a religion of people. It's a religion about people, okay? It's a religion about the personal God. Many religions are basically just ideas, kind of giving you, offering you good ideas, better ideas, more doable ideas. Christianity is not a religion of ideas, okay? Now, it has doctrines and teachings and things like that, but those doctrines and teachings are about persons, the tripersonal God, about people. And so the focus of Christianity is really about people. It's a people-oriented, very personal-oriented religion. So it's really having to do less with ideas and more having to do with relationships between people and God and people. So Christianity is really a get-to-know-you kind of religion. In fact, most people would say, most ancient literary researchers today would say the Gospels are most likely the first biography in antiquity. The gospel narratives of Jesus is kind of this biographical account of who Jesus is. And that's kind of an interesting take, is that there's many books of antiquity about journeys and things like that, the Odyssey and others that are like very, interesting tales. But they're not necessarily biographies. They're not biopics of this person. They're not really following along specifically and trying to reveal who this person is to you. And so that's another interesting thing about Christianity, is that the Gospels are not a bunch of interesting rules and things to think about, okay? They're really explaining who this person is. And this person is explaining who God is. And these explanations are meant to be received by people who God calls the church. So it's kind of fascinating the more you think about Christianity is really a religion of people about a personal God and his people. That's really what Christianity is. So Apostle Paul was the champion, the greatest champion of Christianity. And so getting to know Apostle Paul, what two books would I tell you to really read? Well, of course, two scriptural books. The first one I would tell you that you really need to read, and is more of a biographical account than almost any other one, is the book of Galatians, okay? The book of Galatians, and I know that's kind of backwards there because it's kind of how the video is, but the book of Galatians is explaining Apostle Paul's life, especially in chapters 1 and 2. These are kind of autobiographical accounts of the Apostle Paul's life. He was once someone who tormented, imprisoned, and even killed Christians. This is a person who thought, in his ignorance, that the rules and regulations and ideas that he'd come to believe and hold dear were the accurate depiction of this God that had revealed himself in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and through the mediation of Moses in the books of Genesis and Exodus. Unfortunately, he'd gotten it all wrong. And it's just kind of a crazy thing if you think about it. He'd gotten it all wrong. So much so that Jesus Christ himself, risen and crucified, he came and visited him in Acts chapter 9 and said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he's like, who am I persecuting? And he's like, my body, Jesus, me. And so Galatians is an autobiographical take of Apostle Paul. If you read Galatians, it's only 6 chapters, you're going to understand about who he is. It says here, he says, hey, I know what you guys have heard about me. It's all bad, right? But he says, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preach is not of my own origin. It's not of human ideas. He goes on and says, you've previously heard of the way of life of Judaism that I held to, how I persecuted the church of God. I've tried to destroy it. I was advancing Judaism beyond my own age, beyond many of my own age, and among my people, I was the most zealous for the tradition of my fathers. But then look what it says in verse 15 of chapter 1. It says, but when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. My immediate response was not to consult any human being. Since this is an autobiography of Apostle Paul, the book of Galatians, especially chapter 1 and part of chapter 2, it's explaining that he was a zealot when it came to trying to do the law, persecute those who came against the law, and the law was basically his God, okay? But it says that when the Lord was pleased to reveal himself in Paul's life, he says that he had been set apart even before he was born. He understood that God's grace goes beyond his own limited historical experience. It goes back into God's own decision before he was born to rescue Paul. It's amazing. There's another incredible passage, not too much later. In fact, I think it's just a few books later, or actually a few books before, sorry, in 1 Corinthians 15. And Paul says something very interesting here about his own experience of God. And he says this. He says in verse 5. No, actually, it says in verse 5 is right. Verse 5 of 1 Corinthians 15, it says, he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12, okay? After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born, basically illegitimate kind of sense, okay? Then he says, for I am the least of the apostles. I don't even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his effect to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them. Yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. Students, this is a very interesting autobiography of Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, 5 through 10. And he says, God, brought me in last, but I worked harder than everyone else. Not because of me, because of the grace of God working in me. But I was kind of the runt of the litter. I was the last pick on the team. And I was an untimely born, kind of illegitimate kid of the apostles because of who I was, where I came from. Since you need to get to know Apostle Paul, he is the most intriguing and fascinating figure, champion of Christianity the world has ever seen or ever will see. Okay? Again, we're not saying that he is the foundation of our faith, that's Jesus Christ, but he was the one who championed and pursued and pushed out Christianity beyond any wildest imagination could have thought. Because of the grace of God that was working in him, okay? So Galatians and 1 Corinthians 15, I think, are two great places to learn about the Apostle Paul in the Bible. And, of course, Acts chapter 9. For those of you that really like to read maybe, pseudo-challenging books about Apostle Paul and about what his theology is, about what he thinks and believes, there's actually a really good intro little level book by N.T. Wright, as well as a book by John Barclay. They're good, but I don't own those. But something that's just a little bit harder than those, that actually engages a little bit more of what he believed, is a book by C.K. Barrett named Paul, okay? And it basically an introduction to his theology, okay, and his thought. And this book, to me, was profoundly helpful to understand the Apostle Paul. So this book's very, very good. It's not that long, 150 pages long. I wouldn't say it's an easy book to read. It's more about his theology, and it's one of the great English Pauline scholars in the world, who died, I think, back in the 80s or 90s. But great book on Apostle Paul. The second one I found to be easier and a little bit more accessible to understand his thought is a book by none other than Gordon Fee, the Christian thinker that's a New Testament scholar, okay? In his book called Jesus, the Lord, according to Paul the Apostle. Gordon Fee, okay? This is a great book. Not that long. It's actually not that hard to read, in my thought. It's very theological, okay? But it's actually a kind of more accessible version of his bigger book on the same subject. And it's a very good book by Gordon Fee. So, Jesus the Lord according to Paul the Apostle. And you understand who Paul believes Jesus to be. Who does he believe Jesus is? And it's a great book to talk about that. So, you've got Galatians, 1 Corinthians 15, C.K. Barrett's Paul, an outline or introduction to his thought. And then you've got Gordon Fee's Jesus the Lord according to Paul the Apostle. Great books. And again, I'd also recommend John Barclay and N.T. Wright's little very thin book called Paul, a biography. And that's a little bit more of his life than it is maybe his thinking, okay? So you need to get to know who Apostle Paul is. You know, if you call yourself a Christian, you need to understand that Paul is the greatest champion, one of the foundational pieces of Christianity, and you need to get to know who he was, okay? So that's our first episode in this Getting to Know You series, and the Getting to Know series is going to focus on about 10 minutes to explain, you know, a couple important people that Christians need to know a little bit of to enrich their faith. All right, signing off.